In this vid, I'm going to be ranking films that I saw in the calendar year of 2020. For me personally, one of the ways I define each year is by the films that came out. So obviously 2020 was very unique, but even given the unique circumstances, I was still able to see my fair share of films, and I'm going to rank them in this video right here from worst to best. Now, in terms of the films that are going to be in this list, it's going to be films that either released in theaters or were going to release in theaters and had to go to streaming in order for people to watch them. So with that in mind, let's get started. At number 9 is Tenet. Tenet was the only movie to release in theaters during the pandemic. This was back in early September. I went and saw the movie in theaters, so it was obviously a very unique movie watching experience from that aspect. But besides that aspect, I've never quite had an experience watching a movie like Tenet in the theaters, because the fucking movie is literally incomprehensible. And I don't mean that from the perspective of the movie is intentionally holding back information from you and trying to be smart. I mean the movie is just incomprehensible from just basic filmmaking perspective when it came to figuring out what the story was, its dialogue, its character motivations. Everything about this movie was just super confusing, and not in a good way like Inception was, to where I just did not know what the movie was about. And midway through the movie, I had to Wikipedia things to see like what the hell's going on in this movie, and it still didn't help. The basic way to sum things up is that I couldn't spoil the movie even if I wanted to. It was that incomprehensible. And it's a shame because the movie comes from Christopher Nolan, and the movie's got some good filmmaking in it. When it comes to action scenes, its direction, in most cases, the cinematography, that stuff is great. Because it was just incomprehensible from a story perspective, dialogue perspective, what the goddamn movie was about. Yeah, I just couldn't love this movie. I wanted to love it, but the fucking movie would not let me love it. At number 8 is Scoob. Scoob was a movie that was supposed to come out in theaters in May, but instead settled for a VOD release on the same date in May. And I thought the idea for a CGI Scooby-Doo movie was a great idea. I love Scooby-Doo. And this is a movie that overall had its moments where it amused me, but overall I thought it was pretty flat in terms of how it's written. It settled for just being sort of an okay kids film and didn't aim very high when it came to the writing and entertaining the adults at the same time as kids. And also was missing some of the stuff that makes the Scooby-Doo series great, the various incarnations, mainly having a goddamn real mystery to solve. Along with that, it separated the mystery gang for a long extended part of the movie. So yeah, by the time the movie was done, I was like, you know what, I actually really prefer those live action films more than this CGI one, and that's a shame because I thought this movie did have potential. At number 7 is Wonder Woman 1984. Yeah, this one hurts to put this low just because the original was so goddamn good. It was great. But this movie just dropped the ball when it came to story. A story about wishes was just like, really kind of iffy. The writing was The story was There were a whole bunch of plot conveniences, just a bunch of stuff that just did not make any sense. The 80s aspect played very little into the movie to where it didn't even have to be set in the 80s. There was some decent stuff, like I did like Cheetah, played by Kristen Wiig. Diane and Steve still had great chemistry. But overall, this movie was kind of a disappointment, and this movie just did not need to be 2 hours and 30 minutes. That was way too long for this movie. At number 6 is Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog, along with that Tomb Raider movie from a couple years ago, are definitely probably the best video game movies of all time. And that's not saying much just because most video game movies are dog shit. This movie is definitely not dog shit. I just wish it aimed a little higher to be something more than just a kid's film. They just didn't aim very high when it came to the writing. A lot of the writing was really kind of subpar. I wish it aimed to have a tone more of sort of like Detective Pikachu, to where it could entertain the kids and adults at the same time. As it is right now, it aims more to be a kid's film. But the movie was still fun enough. It had a great fun version of Sonic and a great performance, a really fun performance by Jim Carrey as Dr. Robotnik Eggman. He was just really fun to watch in this movie. At number 5 is Onward. Onward is a classic example of Pixar being a victim of their own success, to where they're making a movie that's trying to go for those emotional Pixar feels when it comes to the emotion, the sadness, just the feels at the end. And even though it's doing an okay job, it's just not doing a great job as some of those great Pixar films do. So in that aspect, that's why it feels a little subpar. And I don't know, me personally, I just wasn't all that interested in this gimmick of these sort of fairy tale elements being put into sort of like a modern setting. I don't know, that gimmick just wasn't all that interesting, and not all that interesting compared to the other stuff Pixar has done. So yeah, in that aspect, I don't feel like it led to a great story, even though the movie is definitely not bad. The best way to categorize it is a solid movie, but sort of a mediocre Pixar film. At number 4 is Mulan. Mulan definitely felt different from most other Disney live action remakes, just because it was obviously trying not to be just a carbon copy of the original film. It really aimed to be something more than that. It took obviously inspiration from the original animated film, but also a lot of inspiration and stuff from the actual Chinese legend. So where you watch the movie, it just felt different from other Disney live action remakes, and even just Disney live action films in general. Just the cultural feel, the seriousness, the tone. I thought it all worked really well for this movie, to where it actually felt like you were watching a Chinese legend in this movie, an actual Chinese epic. So in that aspect, I thought it worked really well. even though it would have been nice to see stuff like obviously a live action Mushu. But instead, I thought what they were aiming for, they did pretty well. I think the movie just needed more oomph when it came to the characters, when it came to the supporting characters, and even Mulan herself. While I didn't think she was bad, she definitely could have had more character and definitely doesn't compare to the Mulan we saw in the original film. But for what this movie was trying to do, I thought it was actually pretty successful. At number 3 is Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. I think this movie nailed it when it came to sort of giving the right tone and writing for a Harley Quinn movie. They took a lot of inspiration from the Deadpool movie when it came to the writing, the tone, the dialogue, even stuff like sort of the editing style and the narration and the action, to where that works really well for a Harley Quinn movie. And this live action version of Harley Quinn is a lot of fun to watch and really entertaining. So as long as the movie is solid in other aspects like the villain, the supporting characters, and the story is sort of good enough, then you definitely have a winner on your hands. So I thought this movie was pretty entertaining. And the movie was even entertaining when it came to the actual team up aspect of the Birds of Prey, to where once the whole team comes in, I still think the movie was kind of fun because those supporting characters were pretty solid and fun enough in this movie. So I don't really understand why this movie sort of kind of flopped the way this did, because this movie came out sort of pre-pandemic and definitely did not meet sort of box office expectations. It's really kind of surprising just because I thought this movie kind of delivered and people like this live action version of Harley Quinn. So I don't really know why this movie didn't perform at the box office like it should have, but me personally, I really enjoyed the movie. At number 2 is Bad Boys for Life. The first two Bad Boy movies, while fun, were really kind of lacking when it came to sort of having a good story and a good script, to where those movies, you really couldn't call them good movies. They're really sort of just more fun movies that relied on the two humor and chemistry between the two leads, Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. This movie really sort of cleaned up the bad story elements of the first two and really tightened up, gave it a better script, to where it was actually just a really fun movie that really gave you still the stuff that you wanted from the other Bad Boy movies, mainly the humor and chemistry between Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. It had good supporting characters. The action was still good. The story was a lot better. It was just a surprisingly really fun movie that really did rejuvenate the franchise 17 years after the previous movie. It really felt sort of like the Fast and Furious version of the Bad Boy movies. So yeah, this movie was probably the biggest surprise of 2020. At number 1 is Soul. Soul is probably the weirdest, trippiest, just what the hell Pixar movie they've ever released, because you're watching the movie and just like, wait a minute, they're making a Pixar movie about sort of the afterlife, the great beyond and stuff like that. It's just like, what the hell's going on here? And the movie gets weirder and weirder as it goes along, to where a lot of the stuff just was not shown in the trailer. But even as the movie gets weirder, that's when the mature messages about the soul, sort of your purpose, your spark starts to come out. And it's only the kind of stuff that you can get in a Pixar movie, a movie that's animated but still trying to be mature and it's not dumbing down messages for kids, and it's really made more for adults, to where those messages is just like, wow. That's really something that kind of cuts deep. So that aspect, the Pixar sort of messaging, was still spot on in this movie, those mature themes. And the movie obviously stands out because it's the first ever Pixar movie to ever have sort of a black character as the lead and showcase black culture. And those scenes are just amazing when it came to stuff like the barbershop scene, obviously the jazz element, those musician scenes, and even sort of like the animation style fit that stuff so well. So the movie was just like, it was great to see that stuff in a Pixar movie finally, and that stuff is really appropriate obviously for what we saw in 2020. So yeah, Soul was a movie that really delivered on what it wanted to when it came to those mature themes. It started off kind of weird and took a while to sort of a decent amount of time to get going, but once it got going, those mature themes came in, and obviously the cultural black element throughout the movie. Yeah, Soul gets my vote for my favorite film of 2020. So there you go with my ranking for films that I saw in 2020 to sum things up. At number 9, Tenet. At 8, Scoob. 7, Wonder Woman 1984. 6, Sonic the Hedgehog. 5, Onward. 4, Mulan. 3, Birds of Prey. 2, Bad Boys for Life. And at number 1, Soul. So yeah, it was obviously a very different year when it came to watching movies. Over half of the movies, 5 of them on this list came out post-pandemic. But given the unique circumstances, I'm glad that these movies were able to come out and give us something to watch during what was a different year, to put it kindly. I just hope going forward that eventually, once things come back to normal, that we can get back to watching things in theaters, just because I don't want the actual theater going experience to get away. I still think that's an important thing when it comes to watching movies. But I'm glad that the movies that came out in streaming this year did actually come out, because it gave us something to watch during a year that was, like I said, different, to put it kindly. So that'll do it for this video. If you made it this far into the video, thank you for watching.